Ethical and moral frameworks. There are several moral frameworks used to think about morals and ethics around the world. There is no single moral standard. However, most frameworks across the world do share moral values. So being good to parents, not lying, and so on. Morals have evolved with human beings in human evolution and is one of the major differences between humans and other animals. And some have even also argued that morals, the idea of morals came first, and that actually led to human consciousness and other qualities that distinguish humans from other animals. And if we take a look at Greek antiquity, we have some interesting maximums or ultimate ideas of moral behavior, and the three main Delphic maximums, which were maximums given by the god of Apollo and inscribed in the temple of Apollo, dates back to the 4th century BC. I have an image over here to the right of that, where that temple was. And three of the main ones that often discussed that were inscribed in this temple was know thyself, nothing in excess, and surety brings ruin. So the first two are kind of more straightforward, know thyself, and the second one as well, nothing in excess, so in a way, everything in moderation. And these maximums are part of the ethical framework of Greek antiquity. And they're actually very interesting because it's kind of different than ideas we think about nowadays. If you ask somebody what's the most important moral principle, I would expect rarely somebody would say know thyself. But that's what they say here. Nothing in excess, I think, is a great one because it talks about, it refers at least to the concept of balance, which surely is one of the most important concepts in all of human existence or existence in general. And the other one is actually more difficult to interpret. Surety brings ruin, and then there's some debate on what actually that means. But I think it has to do with the fact that you always need to have some degree of humbleness and doubt of yourself, because if you're so full of yourself, you are going to bring ruin onto yourself. And of course, this has to do with Socrates' ideas of, and other Greek philosophical ideas of questioning and questioning again to actually know the truth and realizing how ignorant we really are about the world around us. If you actually look, though, there are actually 147 Delphic maximums as cited by Stobus. So there's not just three, and you can imagine three sounds like quite a few. And if we look into these actually seem quite good to me. I would really kind of respect and appreciate these, although of course with some maybe modifications for our times, but follow God, obey the law, respect the gods, respect your parents, be defeated by justice, know by learning, what you listened, understand it, be thyself, set out to be married, know your opportunity, think more mortal thoughts. I think these are very interesting, and we should really bring some of these back because I don't think people are really thinking or applying these nowadays. But let's note that there are lots of these maximums, or they almost seem like commandments, right? They have these imperative verbs in the front. These are all directives. Respect, do this, be that, know such, and help, control yourself, control your temper, and so on. Now I wanted to, though, expand and broaden these views here and talk about a few frameworks from the Western literature, which are just ways to think about ethics. Some of these may identify some specific maxims, some specific commands, let's say, but they are more like frameworks of how to think about humans and what we can judge as ethical or not. So first is what we're calling Kantianism. I don't really like the term. The term is related to Immanuel Kant, philosopher of the 17th and 18th and 19th century. But we can think about it as a kind of the categorical imperative. So in this perspective, ethics are about following moral imperatives, which may be what he called hypotheticals, which is kind of more contextual and circumstantial. So if you want to understand nutrition, well, you need to study it. There's no other way around it. Or if you want to be healthy, you need to, eat vegetables or eat meat or whatever it is. Or the categorical, which are more absolute or general. So do unto others as unto on oneself, or know thyself, and so on. In the Kantian perspective, following the categorical imperative is more important than any particular outcome. This is important as we relate that to utilitarianism. So if the law of the land is the ultimate categorical imperative, then breaking the law to help someone is unethical. And then I think they would probably remove the if here and then just stated that law is the ultimate categorical imperative, and therefore breaking the law to help someone is unethical. So that's the view of the categorical imperative. Utilitarianism has the perspective that the right or wrong depends on the utility of the outcome obtained by the actions or behavior. So the consequence of the outcome. And also the right action is that which produces the greatest possible outcome for the greatest number. It's a very interesting idea because it's really hard to kind of argue against it. There's just this practical sense to it and this practical logic that it's very difficult to argue against. So in this idea, moral actions are dependent on circumstances and the relevant facts at the time in the specific context. An action, rule, or outcome is moral if it produces more good than bad. So there's a net benefit for the greatest number of people compared to an alternative. So if a law is being broken, but it's helping to save lives, and not breaking the law doesn't save any lives, then clearly breaking the law is the ethical thing to do if you're going to save lives, because that's the approach of the utilitarianism. So social contract theory, in this perspective, right or wrong are determined by members of society and principles they agree to follow. So this is not a set of standards, but it's just a kind of idea associated with liberal development in Renaissance Europe, questioning the need to follow Christian morals. And they're essentially establishing that the set of ethical rules, whatever they are for a society, are created or should be created by and for that society. And so there needs to be a kind of social agreement or consent. So by rational individuals, right, by people that are assumed to be adults and have free choice and free will to the set of rules of any given society. We also have ideas related to virtue ethics. And here I'm going to talk about that in just in terms of classical virtues, as we already went over a little bit. So virtues refer to actions or characteristics of moral excellence. Actions that are virtuous are those deemed virtuous by, well, in a way, by some type of tradition. So we can't kind of escape that because different traditions have identified different virtues. Although, of course, there's a lot of overlap. And the four classical cardinal virtues of the Greco-Roman tradition are temperance, prudence, courage, and justice. And Christianity also added faith, hope, and love, which also sometimes thought of as charity, to create the seven heavenly virtues of this Western tradition. Now, there's a lot of thinking about this. So in a specific context of public administration and public management for government workers, just as an example, there is the popular Waldo's 12 ethical obligations for public administrators. And these identify some of the concepts, the ideas we've been talking about here, but also point to just a variety of ethical obligations that exist. So there are obligations to the self, to oneself. You have to take care of yourself first, because that's what we have to do. And without that, it's hard to help anybody else. But we also have obligations to family and friends, and then to our profession, and then to also bureaucratic or professional norms, and also to the democracy more broadly. Although I wonder, how this would apply in China. to nation and country, and to the law and the Constitution. Okay, these seem a little bit like redundant. You can put this together, but and there's also religion or God and humanity and the world, public interest, and also middle range collectives, which is just whatever else I guess could be good or appropriate at a specific time. Now, what I find really interesting, and I really wanted to share with you here, is the moral foundations theory, which also has been developed by individuals in the United States and maybe Europe as well. So it is a kind of Western perspective, but it is a very broad global perspective on ethics, identifying where morality comes from, where do ethical judgments, moral judgments come from. Why are moral judgments so often so similar across cultures, yet sometimes so variable? Is morality one thing or many? And moral foundations theory says that, well, it's not one thing, but it's not infinite things either. It's a limited and manageable amount of concepts or directions for actions. And there's a famous book about that goes into this by Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And these ideas are being more talked about, actually, which I find very interesting in the popular media. So to understand the moral foundations theory, let's recognize that they established that there are 5 or 6, they kind of expand into the idea of freedom to nowadays, but 5 mainly, and maybe 6 moral foundations. And these are determined here in terms of the spectrum of their action. So you see like kind of 2 opposing terms. The one is care and harm. So more care means less harm, more harm means less care. So they're all kind of a spectrum. There's fairness and cheating. And so more cheating, less fairness, more fairness, less cheating by definition. The loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And these are essentially the 5 moral foundations that are observed all around the world as sort of consistent and unifying of a human's moral foundations. And there's more information here about original triggers, like how did these develop in the evolution of human beings, because of course the morals are part of biological evolution. The current triggers for these, characteristic emotions associated with each, and also relevant other virtues or terms that people associate with each of these. So you can kind of pause here and look into this. Of course, take a look more into the paper. And I'm going to move on to show how these are related to the also major divisions in politics of right and left. So they conducted some studies taking this framework that they have, and they wanted to show how moral foundations of left and right are consistent around the world. And in particular, what they find is that liberals, or the left, so let's focus on the term liberals. Usually nowadays, what's happening is that they emphasize the importance of harm, or also called harm avoidance. So let's remember that spectrum. This is care, so avoiding harm, and fairness. But they judge authority, purity, also sanctity, and in group, which is also loyalty. So these 3 principles, they rate that as not very relevant. So this is degree of relevance and importance as a moral foundation. So, and this may seem like far, but actually this is a big distance. It's like twice as much. Here in year 4, here in year 2. So this has major implications for human conduct. The moderates kind of going more in the middle, and then the conservatives, they actually rate all of these fairly similar. Now you can see this is in Canada. Okay, now in UK, you see the same thing. Liberals think that avoiding harm, that's the greatest moral foundation, and applying fairness, but authority, in-group loyalty, and purity, sanctity, not very much. Supposedly they don't care about this, but of course it does get more complicated when you look into it. But you see the consistency with the same kind of questions in Australia, asking Australian people. Conservatives, they respect authority. That's kind of their characteristic. In-group loyalty, yes, they rate that highly. but also fairness, although less than liberals, and everything is more kind of associated here. And you see this distinction here in the liberals and the kind of closeness on the conservatives. And you go into Eastern Europe, you see the same pattern. Western Europe, very similar pattern. Latin America, very similar pattern. Muslim Middle East, very similar pattern. East Asia, South Asia, essentially the whole world. So it's very interesting, and I think provides a very good framework for us to think about the differences between liberals and conservatives nowadays, and also why there is so much difference. What are the principles that they are adopting, and which ones are they supporting or not? So in all, I just want to wrap up with a reference here to the importance of thinking about the differences in our moral foundations, and highlighting this amazing individual here, Daryl Davis, who is a musician, a phenomenal blues singer and pianist, who is also this individual who's going around, has been going for years, to KKK rallies and converting, literally actually converting people who were white supremacists or following the KKK to essentially leave their beliefs. They just being persuaded that their beliefs were wrong and stupid, and to leave those institutions and renounce those beliefs. So very interesting figure, and I think kind of adopting these principles sort of moral foundations and uniting us into the universal morals that we have as human beings. That's it for this one. See you next time.